The security alarm screamed over the checkout lanes, as if the whole store was accusing her. Under the cold fluorescent lights, a young mother in a faded denim jacket froze a carton of baby formula still in her hand. Her little boy clung to her leg, one tiny fist gripping a crushed box of cereal like it was his lifeline. A security guard grabbed her elbow hard enough to make her wince, already talking about the police. Shoppers slowed their carts to stare, then kept moving, grateful it wasn't their problem. The store manager folded his arms, righteous and annoyed, saying loud enough for everyone to hear, "We don't tolerate thieves here." The boy started to cry, a sharp, panicked sound that cut straight through the hum of the store's music. And that was the moment a grease-stained hand reached in and gently pushed the security guard's arm away. A man in a work jacket, still smelling like diesel and winter air, stepped between them. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it as he said, "You're not calling anybody. I'm paying for all of it." Every eye in that checkout line turned to him, wondering who this guy thought he was. He didn't look like a hero, just a tired 37-year-old bus mechanic who'd finally had enough of watching people kicked while they were already down. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. A few hours before that scene in the grocery store, Daniel "Danny" McCord was under a yellow school bus flat on his back, fighting with a rusted bolt. He'd been the head mechanic for the Dayton School District for almost 10 years, the kind of man who knew every rattle, every stubborn engine by sound. His days started before sunrise and ended long after the last bus pulled in, hands chapped from cold Ohio winters and motor oil that never quite washed off. At 37, his body ached like he was 20 years older, but he kept going because there wasn't really another option. His wife Jenna had died 3 years earlier after a sudden aneurysm. No warning, no long goodbyes, just a knock on his garage door and a neighbor with tears in her eyes. Since then, it had been just him and his 10-year-old daughter Lily in a small rented house 2 blocks from the bus depot. He packed her lunches, signed school permission slips with greasy fingerprints, sat in the back row at school concerts in his work boots, always a little embarrassed by the smell of diesel he carried with him. The grief never really left. It just shifted from a sharp stabbing pain to a dull weight he carried in his chest like an extra tool in his belt he couldn't put down. People thought of him as the bus guy, a reliable pair of hands, not much more. He was the guy teachers nodded to in the parking lot without ever really seeing him. The guy kids waved at when a bus rolled by, but never thought about twice. What they didn't see was the way he double-checked every brake line thinking of his own daughter sitting behind that windshield. Or how he skipped new clothes, new tires, even dental work, so Lily could have braces and a chance at a different kind of life than his. That night, after a late emergency repair on a team bus that rolled in with smoke pouring from the hood, Danny finally clocked out close to 10 p.m. He was exhausted, hungry, and still had a math worksheet to go over with Lily before bed. On the way home, he swung into the 24-hour supermarket for bread milk, and the one treat he allowed himself on overtime nights, a cheap frozen pizza. He stood in line with his basket staring at the candy rack without really seeing it, thinking about the overdue rent notice folded in his back pocket. That's when he noticed the woman 2 customers ahead of him, shoulders hunched, counting out crumpled bills and coins on the conveyor belt. There was a gallon of milk, some generic cereal, a pack of store-brand diapers, and that single can of formula. Her little boy watched the scanner with wide, tired eyes, like the beeps were a verdict on his whole world. The cashier read the total, and Danny saw the woman's face crumple just a fraction before she forced it still. I'm a little short, she whispered. Can you take off the formula? And in that small, painful moment, without knowing it yet, Danny McCord's life took a turn it would never come back from. Danny paid for the woman's groceries before she even understood what he was doing. He kept his eyes on the card reader, not on her face, because the shame there was familiar. Too familiar. He didn't want to make her feel like she owed him anything. When the manager finally waved them through, irritated and muttering about store policy, the woman murmured a thank you so soft he almost missed it. Her little boy whispered one too barely louder than the beep of the scanner. Then she disappeared through the sliding doors into the cold Ohio night, hurrying away before anyone else could look at her like she was less than human. Danny thought that was the end of it. But trouble has a way of following good intentions long after the moment has passed. The next morning, he dropped Lily at school, kissed the top of her head, and told her to have a good day. She'd been quiet the whole ride, tired, pale, not quite herself. Probably a cold coming on. As she walked toward the entrance, her backpack bouncing, he felt a flicker of worry. He always felt like that, though. Being a single parent meant carrying fear like a second job. At the bus depot, he opened the garage bay and went straight to bus 42, the one with the stuttering idle that kept the whole fleet supervisor awake at night. It wasn't even 7 a.m., and he was already elbow-deep in grease. Normal, predictable, the one part of the day he could control. About an hour later, his supervisor, Kent Grady, strode in with his usual clipped footsteps and coffee mug. Kent was a man who'd mastered the fine art of looking down on people, even when they were taller than him. Danny had always figured Kent didn't much like him, but as long as the buses ran, Kent tolerated him. Today, something was different. "You got a minute?" Kent asked, voice tight. Danny wiped his hands on a rag. "Sure. Everything okay?" Kent shut the office door behind them, a bad sign. He set down his mug and folded his arms. "Got a call from the grocery store on Maple. Manager says you interfered with store security last night." Danny blinked. "Interfered. Says you paid for a suspected shoplifter's items. Argued with store staff. Caused a scene." "I didn't argue with anyone," Danny said quietly. "A mother didn't have enough money. Her kid was hungry." I stepped in. Kent exhaled through his nose the way people do when they think they're about to deliver wisdom but are really just stepping on somebody's dignity. "Look, Danny, we've got a reputation to uphold. You represent the district when you're in uniform. These kinds of situations get twisted. People stop trusting who we hire." Danny stared at him. "For buying groceries? For helping someone?" "You don't know who she was," Kent said. "Could have been manipulating you, could have been running a scam. Happens all the time. I've seen plenty of people like that. You can't let your emotions run the show." Danny swallowed hard. He'd spent years taking care of kids who weren't his, making sure their buses didn't blow a gasket on the highway. And now he was being lectured like some naive fool who didn't understand the world. Kent slid a paper across the desk. "I'm putting you on probation for 30 days. Full review after that." Danny felt the room tilt. "Probation." Kent nodded. "One more incident, anything that calls attention to the district in a negative way, and we'll have to talk termination. I'm trying to help you keep your job, Danny." "Help?" That word always sounded wrong from the lips of someone who'd never needed any. Danny left the office in silence. The garage felt colder now, as if the heat had slipped through the cracked concrete floor and vanished. He picked up his wrench, but his hands were shaking too much to use it. By the time he finished his shift, snow flurries were blowing sideways across the highway. He took the long route home, needing space to think. He kept replaying the manager's voice, Kent's lecture, the way people had stared at the woman in the checkout line, like she'd committed some crime by being unlucky. When he pulled into the driveway, Lily was sitting on the front steps, even though she knew she was supposed to wait inside on cold days. Her knees were pulled to her chest. her backpack beside her. She looked up when she heard the engine. "Hey, Bug," he said gently. "Everything okay?" She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Can we go inside?" He unlocked the door, and she went straight to the kitchen table. Her cheeks were flushed, not from cold, but from something she didn't want to say. He crouched beside her. "Talk to me." She stared at her hands. "Some kids at school said you were helping criminals. They said they heard their parents talking, that you got in trouble at work for defending a thief." Danny's stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" "Just some kids," she whispered. "They said people saw you on the cameras, that you helped a shoplifter escape." She wasn't crying, but her face had that tight look she got when she wanted to. He knew that look. It was the same one he'd had at her age when the world felt too big and too cruel. He cupped her cheek. "Lily, I didn't help anyone escape anything. I paid for groceries for someone who needed help. That's all." "They said you could lose your job," she whispered. His chest tightened. "I'm not losing my job. You hear me? Not over something like this." But he wasn't sure. Not with Kent acting the way he had. Lily nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She went to do her homework, shoulders slumped, steps slow. He watched her disappear down the hallway, feeling something inside him sink deeper than before. He'd survived losing Jenna. He'd survived debt, long nights, loneliness so sharp it felt physical. But hurting his little girl, letting her see him dragged through the dirt that was a wound he didn't know how to carry. Over the next few days, the whispers grew teeth. At the depot, a few drivers made comments just loud enough to hear. "Guess anyone can buy a sob story these days." "Maybe she was pretty, huh? That why he stuck his neck out at the gas pump." A driver named Bill chuckled. "Careful with this one, McCord. You start playing hero, you'll end up on the evening news." Danny kept his jaw tight, his head down. He wasn't a fighter, never had been. His strength was quiet, slow, steady. But that didn't mean the words didn't cut. The real blow came when he went to pick up Lily early from school. Her fever had spiked during math class. He'd just signed her out at the office when he overheard the school secretary whispering to a teacher near the copier. "That's the mechanic they were talking about, the one who got mixed up with that shoplifter." "Poor kid," the teacher murmured. "Children pay for their parents' mistakes." Danny froze in the hallway, his daughter leaning against him, hot cheek pressed against his jacket. He didn't say anything, didn't call them out. Just walked past with his head down, carrying Lily to the truck because her legs felt weak. Back home, after he tucked her into bed with a cool washcloth and some acetaminophen, he stood in the kitchen staring at the worn linoleum. His fists were clenched, even though he wasn't angry, he was scared. Everything he'd built, everything he'd kept together with grit and stubbornness felt suddenly fragile. He'd always believed if he worked hard, stayed honest, and took care of his daughter, the world would at least leave him alone. But now, he was the center of a story being told by people who didn't know him, didn't ask questions, didn't care. A story that made him out to be a fool. Or worse. 2 days later, the pressure finally peaked. It was late afternoon, the sky low and gray, the kind of Ohio day where the sun seemed to give up. Danny had just finished replacing a brake line when Kent called out from across the garage. Danny got a minute. He followed Kent into the office, wiping oil from his fingers. But the moment he stepped in, he knew something was wrong. A district HR representative was sitting in the corner, a hard expression on her face. A manila folder sat on the desk. Kent cleared his throat. "We received a formal complaint." Danny blinked. From who? From a parent who was in the store the night of the incident, HR said. They claim you verbally confronted a security guard and, quote, created an unsafe environment for children present. Danny felt heat rise up his neck. That's not what happened. Kent didn't meet his eyes. Given your probation status, we have to consider suspension pending further review. Danny stared at the two of them, the room suddenly too small. Too quiet. Suspension. No paycheck. No insurance. No stability for Lily. He felt something crack under the weight of it all. The gossip, the lectures, the judgment, the sideways glances, the way people he'd known for years now looked at him like he might break something just by breathing. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words stuck. His voice wouldn't come. All he could picture was Lily's worried face in the school hallway, her small hand clutching his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. He realized with a dull, sinking certainty that no one in that room wanted to hear the truth. They'd already decided who he was. A troublemaker, a bleeding heart, a liability. Kent slid a paper across the desk, just like before. We're asking you to turn in your badge until the review is complete. Danny stared at the badge, the symbol of the only steady thing in his life since Jenna died. His jaw tightened. Something big was coming. He could feel it, like pressure building behind a cracked dam. And once it broke, there'd be no patching it back together again. Danny didn't remember the walk out of the office, not the cold concrete under his boots, not the drivers staring at him through the garage windows, not the bitter Ohio wind slicing across the lot. He only remembered the badge in his hand, warm from his palm, heavy in a way that felt personal, like someone had carved out a piece of his life and set it on a table for others to judge. He drove home in silence, the sky bruised purple above the highway. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the streetlights had flickered on, glowing through the early snow. Inside, Lily lay curled on the couch under a fleece blanket, cheeks flushed from the fever earlier that week. Her science homework was open beside her, half finished. Hey, she whispered when she saw him. You're home early. He forced a smile. Yeah, bug, short day. Her eyes softened. She saw more than he wanted her to. She always had. What happened? He wanted to say nothing. Wanted to let her keep one moment of peace in a week where the world seemed determined to bruise her heart. But lying to a kid who'd already lost too much felt like a second wound. I'm suspended, he admitted quietly, kneeling beside the couch. For now. Just while they look into something. She reached for his hand, small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones. Because of the grocery store? He nodded. She leaned against him, her forehead pressing into his shoulder. Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. He swallowed hard. I know, but sometimes people don't see the truth right away. She squeezed his hand tighter, as if anchoring herself to someone she still believed in. He brushed her hair back and kissed the top of her head. He didn't know it then, not fully, but that moment would matter. The fear in her eyes, the trust in her hands. It planted something inside him that would bloom later at the very edge of disaster. The next evening, a storm rolled in earlier than forecasted. Wet, heavy snow fell in thick curtains, turning the streets into a slush of tire tracks and white noise. Lily wanted hot chocolate, so Danny bundled them both up and drove to the corner convenience store. The roads were slick, but he'd driven worse in the old pickup. Inside the store, fluorescent lights buzzed above half-stocked shelves. A portable heater clicked unevenly near the counter, where a teen clerk was scanning canned soup for an older woman. Grab whatever you want, Bug, Danny said, brushing the snow from his coat. Lily drifted toward the cocoa aisle while he grabbed milk from the cooler. A few other shoppers wandered the store, tired, damp, eager to get home before the storm worsened. That's when the wind outside seemed to stop. A strange silence fell over the store, heavy and unnatural. The front door swung open and two figures stepped in, both wearing hooded jackets, snow clinging to their boots. Nothing unusual at first glance, until the taller one lifted his arm, and the metal barrel of a handgun caught the light. "All of you!" the man barked, voice sharp and commanding, hands where I can see 'em. Gasps echoed through the aisles. A can dropped and rolled across the linoleum. The clerk froze behind the register. Danny's heart slammed against his ribs as he instinctively reached for Lily. But she wasn't in arm's reach. She was halfway down the snack aisle, staring at the armed men with wide, terrified eyes. The smaller robber swung a bag toward the clerk. "Empty it. Now." Someone whimpered near the dairy section. A mother pulled her toddler close. The older woman trembled so hard her cane rattled. Danny's breath went shallow. This wasn't the kind of trouble he could fix with a wrench. One wrong move, and someone would die. His daughter could die. The taller man's gaze swept across the store, then stopped at Lily. Something in his expression shifted. Something dark, predatory. He stepped toward her. Danny moved before thinking, before breathing, before fear had a chance to root. "Stop!" His voice thundered across the aisles. The gunman turned, surprised. What Danny stepped into view, hands raised but posture unshaken. "She's a kid. Leave her alone." The gun swung toward him like a magnet. "Back up, hero," the man snarled. "I said everyone stand still." Danny's mind raced. He remembered the day Lily was born, when Jenna put their daughter in his arms and whispered, "She's yours to protect. You hear me, no matter what." He remembered the grocery store manager accusing that mother of being worthless. He remembered Kent calling him a liability. He remembered his little girl sitting alone outside school crying because kids said her dad helped criminals. And he realized something with perfect clarity. He would not let another man, another bully, define who he was. The gunman barked. "I said don't move." Danny kept moving. He took one more step, then another. The smaller robber yelled from the register. "Man, just shoot him!" Lily screamed. "Daddy, no!" That scream fueled him. Danny lunged. The gun fired. A deafening crack split the air. Shards of a display shelf exploded beside him. The older woman shrieked. Someone dove behind the beverage cooler. Danny hit the gunman like a linebacker, driving him backward into a rack of magazines. The gun skittered across the floor. The robber swung wildly, landing a hard punch to Danny's ribs. Pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. Years of tightening bolts in freezing weather had built a strength deeper than muscle, something stubborn, rooted, immovable. He grabbed the man's jacket, rammed a knee into his thigh, and slammed him against the wall again. The man fought hard, but panic had him sloppy. Danny used his own weight, pinning the man's arm behind him with a mechanic's precision, quick, efficient, decisive. The second robber charged down the aisle, knife flashing in his hand. Danny twisted, using the first man as a shield. "Back off." The knife wielder hesitated just long enough for the clerk, shaking but brave, to duck behind the counter and hit the silent alarm. Red lights blinked near the register. Sirens wailed distantly in the storm. The second robber panicked. He turned to flee, but slipped on the spilled magazines and crashed into an end cap. A tower of canned soup toppled onto him, knocking the knife from his hand. By the time he scrambled up, red and blue lights poured through the snowy windows. Police stormed the store in a blur of boots and shouting. "Hands where we can see them. Down on the ground, drop the weapon." Danny finally let go of the first robber, stepping back with trembling hands. Officers swarmed both men, cuffing them and dragging them out into the storm. The store was a mess. Shelves overturned, broken display glass glittering across the linoleum. People shaking, crying, clutching one another. And Lily, she raced toward him at full speed and crashed into his arms, sobbing into his jacket. He hugged her so tightly he felt her heartbeat against his chest. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm right here. You're safe." One of the officers approached cautiously. "You the guy who tackled him?" Danny nodded, still holding Lily. The officer looked around the store. "You probably saved half the people in here, including your kid, if you hadn't stepped in when you did." He shook his head. "Could have been a bloodbath." A few customers stared at Danny with wide eyes, some in awe, some in disbelief. The older woman who'd dropped her cane earlier whispered, "That man saved us." The clerk wiped his eyes. He jumped in front of a gun." Danny didn't feel heroic. He felt shaken, exhausted, the adrenaline fading into a tremble he couldn't hide. But when he looked down at Lily, alive, breathing, gripping him like he was the last safe place in the world, he knew exactly why he'd done it. He'd done it because he was her father. Because he refused to let fear dictate the ending. Because he wasn't what they said he was. A liability. A problem. A man who helped the wrong people. He was a protector. He'd always been one. As police escorted the robbers out into the swirling snow, Kent Grady, who had stopped by the store after hearing the alarm from the district radio, stood near the entrance staring at Danny like he was seeing him for the first time. No judgment, no suspicion, just shock. And maybe something else. Something like regret. Danny held Lily close as the chaos settled the store, slowly filling with the sound of melting ice and distant sirens. Whatever came next, whatever fallout waited, he knew one thing. Everything had changed. And the people who'd misjudged him were about to learn exactly who Danny McCord really was. The paramedics wheeled out the last shaken shopper as melting snow puddled across the convenience store floor. The flashing lights outside cast red and blue shadows over every aisle, flickering across overturned displays, and the shattered candy rack Danny had slammed the robber into. The place smelled like spilled coffee, cold air, and raw fear. Danny stood near the counter with Lily tucked under his arm. She wouldn't let go of his jacket. Her fingers curled into the fabric like it was the only solid thing left in the world. He held her tight, murmuring small reassurances meant more for himself than her. The clerk kept staring at Danny the way people stare after witnessing something their brains haven't caught up to yet. A few shoppers whispered to each other, pointing at him with quiet awe. The older woman whose cane had rattled earlier reached out and touched his sleeve. "You saved us," she said tremulously. "God bless you, son." Danny felt his throat tighten, but before he could respond, the automatic doors hissed open again. In stepped Kent Grady, his supervisor, snow stuck in his beard, his coat thrown on crooked like he'd rushed from his truck the second he heard the call. "McCord." Kent breathed, eyes wide. "I heard you were here. Is it true? Did you?" He looked around the wrecked store, then at the officers, still talking to the clerk, then back to Danny. The badge. Danny's badge sat in Kent's front coat pocket, half visible. Kent swallowed. You took down 2 armed men." Danny opened his mouth, but the teen clerk jumped in. He didn't just take them down. He ran at a gun. "If he hadn't jumped when he did, man, I swear I thought we were all dead." The older woman nodded vigorously. He shielded that little girl. It was like he didn't even think about his own life. Lily squeezed him tighter at that, her face buried against his chest. Kent took a slow step closer, his expression shifting through disbelief, regret, confusion. "Danny! I didn't know you were capable of something like that." Danny exhaled, tired. Didn't feel like much of a choice. But Kent was still staring, and something in his face, almost fear, almost wonder, made Danny's stomach twist. He didn't like that look. It wasn't respect. It was someone realizing they'd underestimated a man for so long that the truth now felt dangerous. Before Danny could say anything more, a detective approached a woman in a long navy coat dusted with snowflakes. "Mr. McCord?" she asked. Danny nodded. "I'm Detective Anya Hartman, Dayton PD. I'm told you intervened before the gunman could harm a child." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I just reacted." Hartman studied him for a long, assessing beat. "Most people freeze. You didn't." Her eyes dropped to Lily, then back to him. "I'd like to ask you a few questions. Not because you're in trouble, far from it, but because I need to understand the level of training you have." Danny blinked. Training Kent cut in. "He doesn't have any special training. He's a mechanic." "A good one," but Hartman held up a hand. "Sir, 2 armed men robbed this store. One fired his weapon. And this man," she pointed at Danny, "neutralized both threats faster than most off-duty officers I know." The clerk nodded vigorously. It was like he knew exactly what to do. Hartman tilted her head. That wasn't adrenaline, that was tactical instinct. Danny swallowed a strange tightness forming in his chest. This was the moment he'd spent years trying to avoid, the moment he thought would never come up again. He looked down at Lily, her frightened eyes searching his. She deserved to know, even if it complicated everything. He took a slow breath. "There's something I should tell you." He turned, slightly, speaking as much to his daughter as to the detective. "Before I worked on school buses, before Lily was born, I wasn't a mechanic." Kent blinked. What Danny nodded once. "I served in the Marine Corps. 13 years. Motor transport unit first, then security detail after my second deployment." Detective Hartman's expression sharpened. "Security detail? As in, Protection Unit Marine Corps Security Force Regiment," Danny said quietly. "Fast action. Personnel defense. Close quarters response." The clerk's jaw dropped. The older woman whispered, "My God!" Kent, suddenly pale, sputtered, "You never told anyone that." Danny shrugged. "Didn't seem relevant to fixing radiators." Hartman crossed her arms. "You left that life behind." "After Jenna died," Danny said, "Lily needed stability. And I'd had enough of violence, enough of looking over my shoulder. I wanted something quiet, ordinary." He glanced around the broken store. "Didn't quite work out tonight." Hartman nodded slowly. "Everything you did makes sense now. Your approach, your control, the way you protected the child first. It was textbook." Kent stepped forward, face flushed. "Danny, why didn't you put that on your employment file, or tell us during hiring that kind of background would have made people treat me differently?" Danny finished. "Or assume things, or expect things." Kent closed his mouth. The detective softened. "Thank you for your service, Mr. McCord, and for what you did tonight." Lily looked up at him, eyes shining with something new understanding. Awe, pride. "You were a hero before this," she whispered. "But I didn't know you were that kind of hero." His heart twisted. "I don't want you thinking heroes are the ones who hurt people, Bug. I only did what I did because I had to." She nodded, pressing her face back into his jacket. Outside, more police cars arrived. Reporters gathered near the tape line, snapping photos through the falling snow. Word was spreading already. Detective Hartman said quietly, "Mr. McCord, a lot of people will want to talk to you after this. The district, the mayor's office, maybe even Columbus." Kent flinched at the mention of city officials. Danny looked confused. "Why would the mayor want to talk to me?" Hartman gave a small, humorless smile. "Because you just prevented what could have been a massacre. 2 armed suspects, 19 civilians, 1 attempted discharge, and you neutralized both threats in under 30 seconds. That's going to make news." Kent's mouth opened and closed. The badge in his pocket suddenly looked like a shameful weight dragging his coat down. He cleared his throat. "McCord, I need to apologize. For earlier. For this morning. For the suspension." Danny shook his head. "Kent, let's just—" "No," Kent insisted. "You deserve to hear it. I let gossip get to me. I made assumptions based on things I didn't understand. And I treated you like a problem, instead of someone who's been holding this whole department together for years." The words hung heavy in the air, more painful than the punch Danny had taken from the robber. Lily peeked up, watching every second. Kent continued. "Your suspension, consider it gone. And when the district sees the news, they'll want to put you on something better than probation. Hell, they'll probably nominate you for an award." Danny exhaled slowly. He didn't know what to say. He didn't do any of this for recognition. He did it because Lily was there. Because she'd screamed his name. Because some part of him, the part he'd buried under wrenches and schedules, knew what to do when lives were on the line. Hartman interrupted gently. "Mr. McCord, if you're open to it, I'd like you to meet someone tomorrow. The head of our Community Risk Intervention Program. We're building a civilian defensive response unit, people trained to assist law enforcement in emergencies. Ex-military EMTs, tactical retirees." Danny blinked. "Why me?" Hartman smiled softly. "Because you're the kind of person who steps forward when every instinct says step back. We need people like that." He looked down at Lily. At the small girl who'd already lost too much. He left the Marines for her. For a quieter life. For something safe. Joining anything even remotely tied to danger felt like stepping backward. But Hartman seemed to sense the conflict. It wouldn't be combat, she clarified. More like disaster response support, community training, preparedness workshops in schools, teaching people how to stay safe during emergencies. A beat. You'd be helping people before the danger happens, not running toward guns. Lily whispered, "Dad, that sounds like something you'd be good at." He brushed a thumb along her cheek. "Maybe." Kent shifted, shame still etched on his features. "Whatever you choose, McCord, I'll back you. The district will too. You've earned that." Reporters began shouting in the distance, cameras flashing behind the police line. Someone yelled, "Is the hero still inside?" Danny winced at the word. He wasn't a hero? Not the kind they wanted him to be. He was just a father who refused to lose one more person he loved. Hartman nodded toward the back exit. "We can take you out the rear. Keep the reporters off you for now." Danny lifted Lily in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder. She was exhausted, warm with relief. As they walked toward the back door, his boots leaving prints across the melting snow, tracked in from outside, he felt the eyes of every shopper follow him. Some grateful, some stunned, some unsure how to process what they'd witnessed. People who'd once whispered about him now fell silent as he passed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. A new job offer, a new responsibility, a new fight, or a chance to rebuild his life from a place of truth instead of quiet suffering. But as the back door opened and the cold air rushed in, one thing became clear. Everything that had been hidden, his past, his strength, his courage was no longer buried. The world saw him now, and the next decision he made would shape not just his life, but Lily's, and maybe countless others. The snow fell harder as they stepped into the night. The city lights blurred behind the storm. A new beginning waited just beyond the glow. The next morning came with a pale sky and the soft hum of reporters outside the house. Danny kept the curtains closed while Lily ate her cereal at the kitchen table, still wrapped in her blanket robe. She watched him with a kind of quiet pride he wasn't used to seeing. Kent called first. He didn't sound like a supervisor. He sounded like a man trying to fix something he'd broken. "Danny," he said, voice unsteady. "The district wants to issue a formal statement this afternoon. About you. About what happened. They're calling you a protector of the community." He paused. "You deserve it. And you deserve more than I ever gave you credit for." The school principal called next, apologizing for the rumors the staff had let slip and offering support for Lily. Then the clerk from the store sent a message through the police liaison, saying he wanted to thank Danny in person for saving my life. It was strange waking up one morning treated like a threat, and waking the next treated like someone to look up to. Detective Hartman stopped by the house around 10 boots, leaving little puddles on the entry mat. She wasn't holding a clipboard or police folder, just a thermos of hot coffee and a business card. "Our program director wants to meet you," she said. "No pressure, but I think it's the right fit." Danny looked at Lily sitting on the couch, coloring. She nodded as if she'd been waiting to hear those words. "What would it mean?" Danny asked. Hartman smiled. "It means teaching people what you already know. It means being the steady one in the room. And it means helping this city become harder to break." He breathed out slowly. It wasn't the Marines again. It wasn't the battlefield he'd walked away from. It was something gentler, something built around preventing fear instead of creating it. "I'll meet him," Danny said. Hartman nodded once respectfully and left him with the card. 3 weeks later, he sat in a small office on the second floor of the Dayton Municipal Safety Center. Posters lined the walls, disaster prep, home safety, emergency readiness. Nothing about violence, nothing about guns. The program director, a calm man named Samuel Ruiz, leaned forward with folded hands. "You're not here because of what happened in the store," he said. "You're here because of the way you handled yourself before it. Your neighbors spoke highly of your integrity, and your record shows a lifelong pattern of stepping up quietly when no one else would." Danny looked down at his hands, scuffed, scarred, more used to wrenches than pens. "I'm not sure I deserve all that," he said. Ruiz smiled softly. "Good. The people who deserve responsibility are usually the ones who doubt they do." The offer on the table wasn't flashy: a role in community safety education, a part-time advisory position for emergency response planning, and the option to train volunteers in basic crisis management. It paid enough to keep him steady. It let him keep his nights with Lily, and it let him use the parts of himself he'd kept buried not to fight, but to teach. He accepted. Kent shook his hand when he turned in his resignation. "McCord," he said quietly, "I hope you know I'll be telling every new hire your name. Not as a warning, as an example." Danny appreciated it more than he let on. Months passed. Winter thawed into early spring, and the city slowly forgot the details of the robbery, even if they didn't forget the man who'd stopped it. Parents waved to him at the school drop-off. The clerk, now with a better job at a hardware store, stopped him in the parking lot just to thank him again. But the biggest shift was inside the house. Lily walked a little taller. She told her friends carefully but proudly, "My dad helps teach people how to stay safe." She'd found her footing again, and Danny saw it every day, in the way she laughed, in the way she slept soundly again. He'd found something too, a peace he didn't expect. One evening in early June, Danny finished teaching a class for local volunteers basic first response coordination and walked outside into a warm sunset. Lily sat on a bench outside the center, swinging her legs, a book on her lap. "Hey, Bug," he said, sitting beside her. "Hi, Dad. Did you save the world again?" she teased. He nudged her shoulder gently. "Just helped some folks feel a little safer." She leaned her head against his arm. "I like this version better. Better than what he asked. The version where people didn't see you. This one feels right." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and watched the last of the sun slip behind the rooftops. He didn't need medals. He didn't need reporters. He didn't need to be called a hero. He just needed a place that matched who he was. A life that finally felt whole. A year after the robbery, the city held a small ceremony in a renovated courtyard behind the municipal building. Nothing extravagant. A few folding chairs, a podium, banners printed by a local high school workshop. Hartman gave a short speech about service. Ruiz talked about community resilience. Then they handed Danny a plaque, not for bravery, but for restoring courage in crisis. A phrase that embarrassed him a little, but touched something deep anyway. Lily stood beside him, her hand in his, smiling wider than he'd ever seen. And in that moment, the past didn't feel like a burden. The grief didn't feel like a chain. The mistakes people had made in judging him didn't sting anymore. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was honest again, full again, connected again. As they walked home from the ceremony, Lily looked up at him and said, "Dad, I'm glad you didn't stay invisible." He squeezed her hand. "Me too, Bug." Snow would fall again. Storms would come again. People would make mistakes and misjudgments and unkind assumptions. But Danny had learned that the world breaks only if you let it. Because sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in the loudest battles, but in the quiet moments when a person chooses to stand up not for recognition, but because goodness demands it. And that kind of courage has a way of changing everything.